I'm Avner Avraham, I'm a former Mossad, and stay tuned with Rabbi Doug.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. I am very honored to have with me today someone who I've wanted to have on this TV show since I heard about him. This is Benny Davidson. Baruch haba. Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. Benny is in Chicago sharing the story of his life, which is really his life at 13 years old.
Yes.
And I want to talk about July 4th, 1976, which I was a young boy at the time and I remember it so well. Benny was on the hijacked airplane that ended up in Entebbe, Uganda, and Operation Thunderbolt, also known as Operation Entebbe.
Also known as Operation Jonathan.
Also Operation Jonathan after Yonatan Netanyahu, who lost his life along with three others, I believe.
Four others.
Along with four others during that time. You were saved. It's an amazing story. The whole story, your bar mitzvah, the background and what happened. I want to mention just right offhand, you might have heard about him. A friend of ours, his name is David, was filming a TV show, a movie in Uganda just a few weeks ago and lost his life on a bus accident. And he was about to become a rabbi. He was actually a long time involved in the Jewish community and a filmmaker, and he was making a story about Ugandan children in inner city schools in Chicago, and was in touch with the Jewish community of Uganda, and was there about to go meet with them, and their bus went off the side of the road, and they were then ransacked on the bus by Ugandans, and so
I'm so sorry to hear that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and he was the only, this Chicagoan, he was the only one, the filmmaker, to die. His son survived and everybody else on the bus survived except for him. So it was a big tragedy for us here in Chicago, which brought Uganda and Entebbe all to light here in Chicago, and even brought up at his levaya, at his funeral, the whole history of things that happened in that country to Jewish people. I want to go back and talk about your bar mitzvah, and what was your plan when you got on an airplane, and where were you going at the time when you were 13 years old in 1976 and you left Tel Aviv on an airplane, and you were on Air France, is that right?
Yeah, the plan was to have a coast-to-coast trip to the United States. It was my bar mitzvah present from my parents. I had my bar mitzvah roughly in April of '76. It should have been a larger celebration in Israel, but due to the death of my beloved grandfather, it was a smaller scale celebration. And as a compensation, my parents decided to take us on a coast-to-coast trip.
Us, meaning also you and your brother?
It's my older brother Ron, who is 4 years older than me, so he was turning 17, 1 year before joining the army. My mother Sarah and my father Uzi. This is the whole nucleus of the family. And since it was the bicentennial, the 200 years anniversary of the United States, my parents ordered a package deal that included flights with Air France, rental cars with Avis, and hotels with Holiday Inn. And we should have been flying from Tel Aviv to Paris, exchanging planes, landing in JFK, renting an Avis car, and driving all the way to the West Coast, staying over at Holiday Inns. That was the plan. And we reached the airport on June 27th. It was Sunday morning, and we found out that the flight is not a direct flight to Paris, but rather with a layover in Athens. My mother didn't like it, but nevertheless, since we've checked in the night before, the suitcases were already en route. So we embarked the airplane and started our journey towards the States.
So did the terrorists and the lack of security take place in Athens when the plane took off from Athens? Is that what happened?
Exactly. We landed in Athens roughly an hour and a half after we took off from Ben Gurion. 2 staircases were connected to the airplane, and people disembarked and embarked because some of the people were destined to fly to Athens.
Sure.
We weren't aware of the layover, but others were aware of that. So some of the people went off the airplane, some of the people came on the airplane. Amongst the people that came on the airplane on Athens with practically no security were 4 terrorists. 2 Germans, 1 man, 1 woman, and 2 Arab terrorists, 2 men Arab terrorists who joined the flight in Athens. I remember going out to the staircase and taking a look at the Acropolis from the airport, the beautiful hill of Athens, and then going back to the airplane and buckling up before taking off to Paris. And I was extremely joyful. That was my first time on an airplane and my first time going out of the state of Israel.
So you ended up, obviously, and we'll find out a little bit more about that, in Entebbe. Is that airport in Entebbe the same airport that David Steiner, who died in the bus crash, that he would have landed in? Or is that airport still not in use anymore in Entebbe?
There are 2 airports, well, there are 2 adjacent airports, or there is one big airport with an old terminal and an old tower, and a new terminal with a new tower.
And they're next to each other?
And they're next to each other, and the runways connect. Thanks God, because otherwise our C-130s, I'm jumping forward, would not been able to reach the old terminal where we are being held while landing in the new terminal. But that's a different operational issue.
Sure. So you took off from Athens. You got back on the plane. It was time to take off. You took off from Athens. What were these events?
And my heart literally took off. Every time we do, I love flying, by the way. I'm a licensed private pilot. I love being in the air. And when we took off from Ben Gurion, I was extremely joyful. And again, when we took off again from Athens, I was extremely joyful again. And after a couple of minutes, we heard, among the noise of the running engines and everything after takeoff, we heard a very high-pitched shrill coming from the front of the airplane. And it took my mother less than a second to touch my father's lap and tell him, Uzi, we've been hijacked. And it took another couple of seconds to see the French stewardess coming on the aisle from the first class towards the coach class where we've been seated, with the terrorist at her back holding a gun to her head and a grenade in another hand.
Unbelievable.
If that's not enough, to the 2 Arab terrorists that were sitting behind us, we were sitting in the 4 middle seats, roughly 2/3 to the back of the airplane. The 2 Arab terrorists were sitting in the back of the airplane, and when the German lady took over, the German terrorist animal, took over on the first class, going backwards, they rose from the back with the guns and grenades in their hands, running forward and yelling, "This plane is hijacked, sit tight or you'll be killed."
When your mother heard this shrill and said this to your father said, "Don't overreact, I'm sure everything's okay, right?"
Yes, that was his immediate reaction, but his immediate reaction was replaced a couple of seconds later with the understanding of the graveness of the situation.
So everybody stayed in their seats. Nobody was killed immediately on the airplane, is that correct?
Nobody was killed. Thankfully enough, no gunfire was shot or no grenade was bombarded. Otherwise, we would have been sitting here.
We wouldn't be. You landed somewhere else before Entebbe or directly in Entebbe?
A couple of minutes after the hijack, the German terrorists who took control over the cockpit, who had no security and no locking for the door, took over the microphones and told us that PLO and the Badr Meinhof took over, Wadia Haddad took over the airplane, and it's now codenamed Haifa 1, and we are flying somewhere. He did not say where, and we were demanded to close the shutters in order for us not to see where we are headed. And a couple of hours later, we landed in Benghazi, Libya,
Right.
the homeland of the beloved Muammar Gaddafi. And it was quite frightening. We were parked at the end of a runway for many hours. Probably they negotiated with somebody or for refueling or whatever, I don't know. Nobody advised us. One of the passengers injured herself and was evacuated from the airplane in Benghazi. It was an UK Jewish lady who was regretfully on her way to the funeral of her mother, and she decided that she must reach London, and she simply hurt herself, saying that she's pregnant and she's going through a miscarriage. She was a nurse, so she knew how to do it, and the terrorists did not want to take any action with that, so they allowed her off the airplane, and she flew to London, and she was the first point of contact for the Israeli Mossad and the MI6 to gather some initial intelligence about what's going on. A couple of hours later, they closed the door and we took off again. Again, they did not tell us where we were flying, so the unknown is becoming a part of your life in such a situation.
Sure.
We flew for many hours and we landed in the middle of the night somewhere. My father, who is an Air Force navigator, tried to calculate with airspeed and length of time in air which countries can we reach. And we thought of China and we thought of others. Nobody thought of Uganda. And we landed in the middle of the night with the shutters closed, not knowing where we are. And after a few hours, when it became morning, they allowed us to open the shutters, and through the windows we saw the old tower and the old terminal of Entebbe.
Did they tell you that you were in Uganda at all at this time, or was it after you departed from the plane that you found this out?
When we opened the shutters and we saw the old terminal of Entebbe and the tower, and actually if you look carefully in Google on the photos that there are of the old terminal, you see that Entebbe and the height above sea level is encrypted on the wall, so it's very easy to understand. And we saw the Ugandan soldiers, so we understood that we were in Uganda.
Was Idi Amin in the airport at the time that you were in the airport?
As far as I remember, yes, he was.
Wow.
And for us, for some of us, we were relieved to see that we were in Uganda because we remember that Israel and Uganda had good relations
In the past.
So we thought that this is the end of the way for us, and there is some kind of a deal struck between Idi Amin, the PLO, and the government of Israel, and we are going to get released.
So people now, there was a separating of people, and there were certain people that were eventually released, and other people taken into captivity. How did that all go about?
So we landed in Uganda on Monday. On Tuesday, they opened the hole in the wall between our terminal and another room that we weren't aware that even exists. And they put a wooden T-bar shaped barrier between those two rooms, 1 meter high like that. And they started calling names, and they said, whomever we call your name, you pick your belongings and go to the other room. And we thought that they're improving our situation because we were 250 people held in a very old, stinky terminal, and life was unbearable. So we thought that we are expanding and dividing the groups so we have more place. By the third name, we understood that they are only calling Israelis and Jewish names, and a selection, like in 1940s, World War II was made, and it was made by a German terrorist.
Wow.
So for a youngster, as a 13-year-old boy, it did not dawn on me immediately that selection and Holocaust is all over again.
Sure.
But for the older ones, the adults,
And you had
it was
Holocaust
immediate.
survivors on the plane.
We had an Auschwitz survivor on the plane, David, with a number on his hand, and he was looking in the eye to the German terrorist woman and walking and crawling underneath that T-bar, humiliated, to the ghetto of the Israelis on the other room.
Okay, when you were in this other room, you were guarded by terrorists and
Ugandan soldiers, the same. But while we were on the other room, the adjacent room, the rest of the hostages, which carried international passports and did not resemble Jews, some of them were Jews actually, holding Jewish names, but did not hold any blue passports and did not resemble Orthodox Jews. There were a couple from Canada and a couple from Belgium that held international passports, but were dressed with kippah and Orthodox Jews, so they were sent to the ghetto as well. The rest of the hostages were released in 2 different flights back to Paris, and the Air France crew was also requested to board the planes and go back, thus getting released. But Michel Bacos, the captain, told the terrorists that since he had 248 passengers, until the last of them is getting released, he's staying.
What a hero.
A great hero. Still alive, 93 years of age, lives in Nice, France, and a great friend of Israel. And him and all of his French crew stayed behind in the big room, and after all the international bearing passports were released, we were told to come back to the bigger room.
Unbelievable. If you just joined us, I'm here with Benny Davidson. He was 13 years old. He's a survivor of the hijack to Entebbe from a plane that originated in Tel Aviv, Israel, and then had a layover in Athens, and where the terrorists actually entered the plane. So now you're in this room with all of these people who are being detained, and what's going on in Israel at this time? Because you do know those things.
Well, I do know them now, but I didn't know them
certainly
then.
you didn't know them then.
We have no communication, none whatsoever, with the world. Idi Amin came visiting us a couple of times a day with all his entourage and Ugandan TV. And some of us went forward not to talk with Idi Amin, but rather to portray and show themselves to the Ugandan TV, hoping that somebody will broadcast it outside of Uganda, and in the outer world people will see where we are and that we are okay.
Who was the Prime Minister of Israel in 1976?
The late Yitzhak Rabin.
Yitzhak Rabin, alav shalom. And so Yitzhak Rabin was right in the middle of making decisions on this, wasn't he?
He was right in the making the toughest of decisions. I know now, 40 years after what was happening in Israel, it started with the basic emergency protocols of not knowing where the airplane is, so they have asked certain commando units to wait in Ben Gurion. Then when they are understood that we have finally landed in Uganda, intelligence arms, Mossad and others, started weaving the web and collecting information, especially from the hostages that were released and were flown to Paris, because they held very valuable intelligence information for whomever wanted to do any kind of operation. And as my good friend and partner Avner Avraham says, without the disastrous selection, IDF would not have been able to do the operation. The valuable information and intelligence gathering that the Mossad had, both in London with Patricia initially, and later on in Paris on Wednesday and Thursday, interviewing roughly 140 people arriving from Entebbe, released with international passports and interviewed by the Mossad, they would not have the exact, accurate intelligence picture to prepare the IDF and the commando unit for the magnificent operation. And I know that the families, and we learned that from actually the late Rabin when we landed in Israel, the families were pressuring the government at all times to enter negotiation and address the demands of the terrorists and bring us back alive.
So there are overhead pictures that were taken. There were no drones at that time. How were those taken?
Again, a point in history that I've learned only a few years ago. because the secrets were already released. The Mossad had an operative, an agent, that had a private pilot license. And the Mossad instructed him to fly to Nairobi and hire a small airplane with a Leica camera. And you know, those were days with cameras with films that you have to switch and click and switch and click. And when you finish the film, you have to push a certain pin, roll it back, and replace it. Now, imagine, I'm a private pilot, so I know what it is to handle a small airplane. He was submitting a flight plan that took him from Nairobi, Kenya, above Entebbe, somewhere else. And en route, when he was over Entebbe, he radioed the terminal, not the old one, but the new one, and said, I have a problem, I need to land. And the tower told him, we have a situation in the airport, you cannot land. So he started circling above, taking dozens of pictures with one hand, remember, rolling, replacing films, flying an airplane, talking with the tower, and trying to identify where is the old terminal, where is the tower, and taking whatever pictures are needed to gather intelligence and generate a real-time intelligence for the state of Israel. He then landed. He told the tower, whatever situation you have, I'm running with a problem, I'm going to crash. So I'm landed. He landed, befriended himself with the technicians, went up to the new terminal tower, took pictures with them as well. He was sort of a James Bond, likable guy. Went back to the airplane, did a couple of that hits on the plane. Okay, now the technical problem is over. Took off again and went back to Nairobi.
What an unbelievable story. How long was it before the Israelis landed, and how did that go?
The Israelis C-130s, cargo airplane, or Hercules as we call it in the Israeli Air Force, took off from Sharm el-Sheikh, which was the southest it was the southest of the points, or the closest one to Entebbe. And since they were carrying lots of troops and lots of vehicles.
How many troops?
220 soldiers and vehicles and armaments, and they were extremely heavy, and tons of fuel, because they've reached the envelope of utilization of the aircraft, and then some more. I was talking to the pilots the other year, and they told me that the takeoff was extremely risky. They thought that they're going to run into the water. And they flew for 7 hours and landed at, the first one landed at 11:06 or 11:03 p.m. on Saturday night, July 3rd. This one was carrying Yoni Netanyahu's commando unit, Sayeret Matkal, with the Mercedes and 2 Land Rovers. They were the first one to land. He taxied, almost reaching the old terminal, hence the runways were connected. I think he parked roughly like 1 kilometer away, so we wouldn't hear the noise of the airplane, and they disembarked, and the convoy drove very quickly to ours. The second, third, and fourth plane landed, I think, 3 to 6 minutes apart. The second one landed with full runway lights. By that time, the Ugandan tower understood that something is happening, and they pulled out the lights. So it was complete darkness, except for a small runway that was marked by troopers on the first airplane that jumped off of it when they taxied, and put batteries near the lamps, the original lamps. So the third one landed almost in complete darkness, and therefore, so the IDF was prepared for any scenario happening.
How long was the actual operation? Now they came in, the Ugandan soldiers were killed who tried to stop them. How long was that whole operation when you were freed?
From history lessons and interviewing and talking with not just the commandos, I think they were on the ground for 58 minutes, less than an hour, the whole operation. Yoni's commando unit storming into the terminal and freeing us, that point in the operation was less than 60 seconds.
Wow.
For me, when I was lying on the ground with bullets running all over,
Your mother climbed on top of you, is that correct?
my mother was on top of me. We were trying to go to sleep. We heard the initial gunshots. I did not understand those to be gunshots. I thought it was bullets smashing to the ground. We found ourselves towards the bathroom, and my mother was lying on top of me, and my father was lying on top of my brother. Gunshots were all around, and I found myself facing down and break myself. That's what came to my mind at the time. For me, it was many minutes. For the troopers whom I talked to, they said it took them less than 60 seconds.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Just briefly, because our time is almost up, and I just want to know, when you were freed, where did you end up going?
We came back to Israel. There was a whole celebration in Israel, but my parents very bravely decided that we must go and continue with life, because that's the way to tackle terrorism. You continue with life. You don't give up terrorism. So it took 10 days for the Israeli Internal Office to issue us new passports. Our older one stayed behind in Entebbe. And on July 14, we embarked an El Al direct flight to New York and did the same coast-to-coast trip of my bar mitzvah present as planned.
What an amazing story. Benny Davidson, a survivor of 1976 Entebbe hijacking from Israel, Athens, to Entebbe in Uganda. This is an amazing story. You're an amazing person, and being able to tell this, and as you say, you remember it so vividly from 13 years old is an amazing thing. I want to thank you so much for being on the show. Yes, please.
As you may recall, last night we talked at one of the congregations in Chicago, and it took me 40 years to talk about this experience. But now, for the last 6 months, and until the future, whomever invites us, Avner and myself, we have a program of showing that experience from a hostage point of view and from an ex-Mossad officer point of view, with the spy stories behind it. And I know that this is a very successful program. So wherever people are interested in hearing about it,
I'll tell you what they can do. I'll tell you what they can do. Email me, info@tvrabbi.com. I will forward this to Benny, and he will get in touch with you to talk about having them come and speak by you. That would be wonderful. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com, where you can see this show online or former TV shows. I want to thank you again so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming to Chicago. You are a hero yourself, and so is your family. You guys who are seeing this, I know you are, like, your jaws are open. This is an amazing story. Thanks for being with us. Hope to see you next time right here on Tape with Rabbi Doug. Thank you again to Benny Davidson. Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
And I'm talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug. Talking about Rabbi Doug on your TV show. Well, he's the rabbi for me. Anytime you need, you're gonna get married or you're gonna die. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug. Gonna see Rabbi Doug on the TV tonight.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.